So we've had almost an hour of presentations. Thanks a lot to the guys. We're looking forward to welcoming back Olga and David, and introduce David Watkins, who's founder and CTO at Dash Rides. Hello, David. So we're now going to be asking for some audience input again. So do remember, guys, any questions you've got from our panel, they're in the toolbar is on the right-hand side of your screen. Get your questions in there, upvote any questions you like the look of for a chance to win Mike Berners-Lee's book, There's No Planet B. So into the session then, and this is how organizations are innovating to reduce their commuter emissions. And I'll start with David Watkins. David just joined us, so you may as well kick us off. So again, we heard from Olga's presentation as well that shared mobility, e-bikes is definitely going to be playing a part and in our kind of decarbonisation journey. So I'd be quite interested to hear from your perspective, any employer that's what they might need to bear in mind if they want to run a successful salary sacrifice scheme for e-bikes.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, firstly, thanks for having me, Finley. Really, really appreciate the opportunity to share this panel with everyone else. I mean, let me give a quick bit of background to Dash before I answer the question, just for some context. So, we're on quite a simple mission here, and that's to get people cycling. And we overwhelmingly believe that e-bikes are the best way to do this. Negating the need for showers and changing facilities at your office. They make hills easy, allow people to travel further. I'm sure most of the people in this audience are preaching to the converted. But the problem is they're fantastically expensive. And even if you can get a hold of an e-bike, you might be worried that it gets stolen. And that's why we started Dash, which is e-bike subscriptions. So it includes insurance, maintenance, a lock and a helmet, and that it's bundled and sold as an employee benefit, so that we benefit from the cycle to work scheme tax savings. And that makes our subscriptions incredibly cheap for employees. They start from £29 a month. We've got a massive range of bikes, something for everyone. And I guess in contrast to traditional cycle to work schemes, there is zero cost to the company. So literally zero cost. It costs companies nothing to run Dash. The admin side of things is significantly reduced, again, compared to traditional sort of cycle to work schemes. And the long list of of companies that we work with, from NHS trusts to household names like Itsu, Financial Times, and many more, they love us because they're getting a fantastic employee benefit, which obviously helps boost sustainability, one of the reasons why I'm here, but also employee health and well-being. And it's doing all of that at zero cost to the company. So that was a very quick intro as to who we are and a bit on the sort of cycle scheme side of things.
And are you finding, so it'd be good to find out anyway, because our audience, anyone here in a large organization who's looking to introduce a benefit like Dash or any e-bike solution, it'd be good to get your thoughts and from your background and how they go about doing that, but also maybe in the context of how accessible they are. So for instance, how much further someone might be willing to travel if they have an e-bike, and actually does this mean organizations can kind of push out the radius for cohorts of staff that they might be looking to promote this to?
Yeah, look, okay, so there's a few things in there to unpack. Firstly, sort of implementing cycle schemes. I think one of the big reasons we exist is we recognize that traditional cycle to work schemes are very complicated. They're complicated from both a company perspective, but also an employee perspective. I very rarely meet someone that says, I love cycle to work, I really understand it well, and it was like a seamless process. I mean, that's why we're quite a departure from those kind of companies. With us, in terms of implementing it within a company, it takes, I think, about 15 minutes to set up, if less if you're fast. So yeah, it's really quite quick. You just access our website. You can get started from there. In terms of the traveling further with e-bikes, I don't have the number in front of me, but absolutely, there is a diagram that I'm thinking of, which I can dig out, but it has the sort of city centre and the radius in which a traditional mechanical bike would cycle, in terms of the majority of people as part of a regular commute, and then the e-bike radius is much larger. I think it's substantially larger, and what it does is e-bikes enable people to travel distances that they wouldn't otherwise potentially consider doing on a mechanical bike, and that's one of the things that makes them so powerful. Is that ease of use.
Fab. We did see from Olga's chart some of the savings that actually this solution, this innovation potentially can offer both individuals and to employers. Olga, I did want to jump over to you to kind of pick that up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add about accessibility angle on the e-bikes. It's obviously, yes, longer journeys, but from the commuter perspective, it's convenience. You don't sweat, so you can wear your suit. You don't necessarily need to go to take a shower, which is obvious, but something people don't think about. But then it's also helping elder generation, basically older generation, to start cycling again, and it actually provides them more opportunities, or like those which are physically less able, and they can actually open up this mode of commute, because otherwise there would be a taxi, car or bus, basically. So yeah, just wanted to add that it's just more angles to it from accessibility point.
I have one other accessibility point I could jump in with. So this is from our own internal data, which is that women are 30% more likely to start cycling with a Dash subscription than they are with traditional cycle to work. So traditional cycle to work often works very well for cyclists, sports cyclists, but for people that are looking for something flexible just to maybe try for a couple of months, including the insurance and the maintenance, that's one of the reasons we believe that Dash is more accessible to a wider range of people. It's not just the cost benefit, say the cost saving that you mentioned, but it's also the ease of use.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, in order to introduce new users, it's very important to have this 1 or 2 months of test and try, because otherwise it's quite difficult for someone to go and buy a vehicle, which is quite expensive, and you're not sure. As for example, women tend to be more scared of cycling, for example. So it's very good in terms of increasing the take up of those groups.
Absolutely, and I think we saw in Mike Berners-Lee's presentation earlier just how fantastic they are in terms of the potential savings, what's needed to charge them, etc. Just moving, I guess, to, because e-bikes, great solution for a lot of people, a lot of others, of course, it's just not going to be applicable. And for those who are particularly going long distances, I think that's where Zelo, we see, definitely can come in. And I suppose it would be good to understand why those services or that innovation is a lot more popular now, Ben. I do have a follow-up question for you, but what are you seeing with employers?
Naturally, one of the things that we're seeing, and a catalyst for our growth at the moment, is a number of public bus services being cut. So typically we're operating in what we call public transport deserts, so places that are quite underserved, etc. And really kind of mapping that out to see, using our routing software, just to see what is the journey time like if they were to get public transport. And what we're finding is, in a lot of areas, it's multimodal and it just doesn't align with shift times. And what we're seeing with the organizations we're working with, where we're kind of putting these facts in front of them and really pulling out that pain point, is they're seeing Zelo services put on and real big uptakes in recruitment, geographical areas for recruitment that they wouldn't have seen before. So I think obviously with those cuts and actually more people looking towards their scope 3 emissions as a bit of a catalyst for us at the moment has been really key.
And how would you suggest that organizations actually go about encouraging their staff to ditch the car and to adopt Zelo? And I guess we could then move over and say the same for e-bike and kind of some of these other solutions. What is it that organizations can actually do to get their staff to adopt that more sustainable mode?
Sure, and I've been in passenger transport for a number of years now, and even looking back about 5 years ago, it was very typical that employers wanted to put these services on, but they wanted them funded as much as possible through charging their employees, charging the end users. So probably only about 20% of them were fully subsidized. If we look at our portfolio now, I'd say 80% of them are fully subsidized. So some of the educational pieces we're doing at the moment with our clients is showing actually the cost of driving to work, the cost of maintaining your car, etc., versus using Zelo services. So that's been really important in terms of showing them the cost benefit of doing it.
I think, and I guess, thanks a lot for that, Ben. I guess that would be a really interesting, see how that kind of aligns with e-bikes as well then. So David, is that something you're seeing as well in terms of actually convincing people to ditch the car, adopt the bike? Is the sustainability piece kind of high up there, or is the messaging more around monetary savings?
It's a good question. So I think monetary savings over sustainability from an employee perspective, I think that is definitely a common theme. In many cases, enabling employees to save, over £100 a month relative to their sort of usual mode of transport, whether that's public transport or in a car. I think, in addition to that, we're not necessarily trying to convince people to cycle. It's about giving people the tools, that the people that want to try cycling, it's about enabling, facilitating that, making it as easy as possible. One of the main routes that people come to us is they will try a sort of shared e-bike solution. So they'll try Lime bikes or Beryl or whoever. And after using that for a while and maybe integrating some of that into their commute, they decide to opt for a cheaper alternative, which Dash is relative to those schemes. So it's not necessarily about convincing people, it's about providing an easy option when they're in the right headspace.
Thank you. And David, Starley, of course, we saw from your presentation that certainly when you were looking at implementing initiatives, it was actually, the environmental piece was quite low down on employees' considerations. But I suppose as an employer, it was high up in your considerations. But of course, it would be interesting to understand from your perspective as well, your strategy, how you went about implementing this sustainable alternatives, and particularly how you use the data piece, which innovations you kind of look to implement off the back of that.
Yeah, sure. So I guess for a little bit of context, Babcock's emissions are quite interesting because we're an engineering company, really. So from an emissions perspective, we've split it into 4 different strands so that we can focus on each different area. The first one is the estates and the assets that we have and that we operate. So that's predominantly Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. We also have transport, which is what we're talking about here, which is not only the business travel and commuting, but also our company car schemes and those vehicle fleet that we have in terms of work vans. And then we also have our products and services, which is the downstream Scope 3 emissions. So the actual products that Babcock builds or supplies to customers and the emissions of those, and the wider supply chain and other Scope 3 emissions as the final of those 4 strands. And for us, actually, the Scope 3 is more than 90%, as for many organizations it is, but the travel part of it is actually only about 3% of our emissions. So from an emissions only perspective, you wouldn't necessarily place transport as the top priority, but transport is so visible that when we're looking at the behavior shifts that we need to adopt and the mindset that we need our employee workforce to get into, it is still very important. So it is one of the areas that we are looking to improve on. And so the case study I gave earlier was Devonport Dockyard, which is our largest site, but we do have a lot of locations across the company. One of the things that we've just recently done is a framework for EV charging across all of our sites. So we're now looking to implement EV charging solutions at a larger number of our facilities with a relatively affordable rate of charging compared to what public charging would be. And that goes hand in hand with the salary sacrifice scheme that we've got for electric vehicles. But of course, the preference is always going to be public transport and active transport. We want to get people out of cars if we can do. Devonport really has been our sort of first mover, and rightly so, because it's the biggest site and we have a lot more influence there. But then we are also looking at Bristol, and in Bristol, it's a really good example of collaborative working. So we are one of the members of the North Bristol Sustainable Commuting SUSCOM network, which is looking across all of the employers and universities in that region of Bristol and really working together to say what the challenges are and how do we resolve them. One of the big ones that we've seen is that the Bristol Parkway train station is about 25-minute walk away. So I'm happy to do that, but the majority of employees don't really want to walk that far to get to the office, and there isn't a direct bus service. So the only real kind of option is a voice scooter, which some people would do and some people wouldn't. So there are things like that we are looking at in terms of how do we address those. But from a strategic perspective, it's primarily what are the priority emissions? So where is the bulk of it coming from? And then where do we have these opportunities to reduce them? So in Bristol, we have a reasonable amount of influence. But for our offices where we've got, 20, 50 people, it's much more difficult, and we're a bit more reliant on what the council or the local area actually offers already. But then as a large company as well, we do have the chance to look at countrywide opportunities as well, and these bigger, agreements like some companies have done with Zelo or Dash. So yeah, hopefully that sort of gives some context.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So you do it looking at it quite strategically at a site level with the circumstances at that particular location. It's interesting to hear more also about the kind of collaborative approach you're taking, particularly in Bristol. I know that a lot of our other clients are using, it's interesting when they talk about that kind of collaborative approach to pull that data and actually use stuff like that to help, I suppose, feed into the business case for other particular interventions. I guess, Olga, what would be quite interesting if I could hop over to you, because of course you work with various different new mobility technologies, and we heard David there talking about walking, e-scooter. Of course, you've worked in shared mobility, mass mobility hubs, which you kind of touched on. Forgive me, we cut you off just before, as well as smart ticketing. So actually, for our audience, which of these do you believe show most promise as potential permanent solutions?
Yeah, I guess it will all depend on the location and the use case and where you implement it. But if we generalize, then I think all the shared modes are here to stay. Demand responsive transport is quite an interesting area to include, and I put probably Zelo as part of demand responsive transport offer, but tailored to a specific use case. So I think they're here to stay. In terms of what's growing, it's a e-cargo bike share. I've mentioned it a couple of times. I think it's probably not necessarily for employers, but it depends on what employer. It can be quite relevant for employers, and e-cargo bike can replace a car and delivery vehicle, and there is a whole big area where it's going to be implemented and can be implemented. In terms of the innovations and what is being trialed, I think mobility as a service is in the trial stage. We have future transport zones, and again, Solon just launched Breeze app. And I think here, if we talk about the employers, a potential link between the subscription models and how employers can subsidize the travel through mobility as a service. So basically, you would have a wallet, and you would your employees will get a certain amount of travel subsidized, and that would include access to all multimodal transport, basically allowing the employers use various modes within their budget, which you've allowed. I think the key issue with the MAS is a general feasibility and commercial feasibility, and there is a whole case that MAS should be potentially subsidized by the government and local authorities. So if it's a case, then yes, and then there is a use case of employers using the MAS app and kind of using that subscription model. I think it's lots of opportunities there. Yeah, I think that's probably a key one. And mobility hubs, I mentioned it before, yeah.
It's interesting. What I'd quite like to do is, because a lot of the innovations we've been focusing on and kind of lend themselves to a bit of an urban environment. A lot of our clients, a lot of the people who are going to be watching ZC3 today might actually be at an employer away from a population centre on the outskirts of town. Could be NHS trust, university, distribution centre, warehouse, and they'll actually have a lot of their staff members who might live in a rural community, and at the moment, really, the only option for them is to drive alone in a car. So I'm interested to know really what innovations you could recommend to an organisation like that. I suppose, Olga, just continuing with you based on what you've seen, you mentioned car clubs. Is there anything else that you could recommend?
Well, services like Zelo, of course, demand responsive transport, if it's within the area, that's a good one. Also, certain local authorities in the UK are starting to introduce loan hire e-moped subscriptions. So basically, those are typically introduced in the areas which has problems with provision of public transport, but it allows the employers to hire an e-moped for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and then when they start working, basically then go and buy on. So that's a good option if there is a funding from local authorities to introduce that.
Fabulous. How about, I mean, Ben, naturally, I'm sure you want to hop in there because Zelo seems like a great solution for that particular problem. Surely, I'm sure it'll be of interest to a number of our attendees today.
Yep, absolutely. And like I mentioned earlier, typically where we're operating is in public transport deserts. So we actually have the opposite effect. So where it is quite close to office, it's well connected, we could look at like micro-mobility and stuff like that. We tend to operate further out, so those rural areas, or even sometimes just where they have to go into a city centre to come back out rather than having a more direct route. So definitely that's something that we're approached probably the most about.
And so where do you guys, each of you, kind of see, and we are going to jump over to the audience questions in a moment, but I just want to kind of conclude with this one, is where you see the future going, particularly as we start getting closer to net zero, and hopefully Mike Berners-Lee talk certainly help galvanize us into action. But I mean, where do we actually see the future of future innovations? Where do you feel it's leading to help organizations decarbonize their commutes? So, I mean, David Watkins, of course, it'd be good to hear from you.
Yeah, well, of course, I'm going to say e-bikes, aren't I? The point just previously around, across the country and in deserts, areas that people don't have good access to public transport. I think it's just worth mentioning that we operate across the whole country, so it doesn't matter where you live, you can gain access to one of our bikes. And I think I see, certainly compared to the shared mobility modes that absolutely have their place, they're incredibly useful. If we think about the e-bikes or e-scooters that are shared, while they are fantastic for point A to B journeys, the majority of journeys we believe are round trip, depending on your lifestyle, but the majority are round trip, and therefore schemes like ours are perfect for sort of integrating into people's lives for going to and from the office, helping people to commute.
Is that kind of in line with what you saw, David? Starley, this is when you when you did the kind of analysis, particularly in your presentation, what you've seen in Bristol, does that kind of align with what you've seen?
Yeah, I guess so. I think e-bikes are certainly important, and yeah, I think it's clear in as Mike Berners-Lee has said, like they are the lowest carbon form of travel. So it's probably something that we should be looking for more. And one of the opportunities I think for employers, or what I would like to see, is a lot more of that collaborative piece where we're working directly with the peers in our areas where we have offices and with the councils to improve that cycling infrastructure, because in many cases there aren't the cycle paths or there aren't the safe networks for people to actually get to work. And so, my vision would be that we have a change in the actual routes to the workplaces so that it's made easier for people and it's just made a bit more normal, because at the moment it's very car dominated, as I'm sure we all know. And yeah, so I think that's going to be really important for the future.
We've only got a few minutes left, and I feel we should, because our audience haven't asked a question for over an hour now. So we're going to go over to Claire and also Sharon. So Claire's got a question here: how far away are we from having car clubs at the town level, and how far are we away from these being affordable as an incentive to ditch personal cars? So that's a really interesting one, because affordability, David Starley, that was on your quite high up on your list, and we certainly heard from Izzy from Ipsos earlier that actually that's really really key consideration, as well as it being equitable. So do you want to take that, Olga? It'd be interesting to hear from you on that one. Question from Claire Boyle.
Yes, so I think well, as I mentioned, there are different types of car clubs and the way they're introduced. And when I mention different models, so we start with back to bay and one way, and then you have community cars and peer-to-peer car clubs. I think they are quite affordable, and as I mentioned, if you are using if you live in an urban area and you're using your vehicle once or twice per week, so car clubs will be more affordable. You can calculate it. I think Commuter used to have a calculator when you can put in your data and see whether it makes sense for you to use the car clubs. So I'd say we're not that far away, but it depends where you are and on your personal circumstances. Again,
we've got a question from Sharon, which I've seen here, and I suppose Ben, you mentioned how 80% of yours are now funded, effectively subsidised by the employer. So it'd be good to get your take on this question from Sharon Walker, which is: does anyone have any experience in implementing a subsidised public transport initiative for employees? And if so, how successful has this been? Have you seen this?
It's quite an interesting one. I was reading it actually, and the word that kind of struck out of me is the public transport there versus the private transport that we're offering. But when we're working with solutions with our current clients at the moment, a lot of them have approached their kind of local authority to find out, can they get subsidised public transport tickets for their employees who do live on a local bus network or around that could utilise it. And I'm yet to find one that's been successful in being able to do that. So we do know that that's an issue. So,
got you. We are slowly running out of time. If we've got time, I'd say for one more question here, which David, from I suppose you're probably best, David Watkins, that is, to pick this one up around both the cycle to work scheme question and Giles's question here. So do you know of any plans to allow bikes to be taken on the buses? In Holland, they have bike racks on the front and rear of the bus, which allows for hybrid transport modes. Sounds good. Do you know about any insights for us here?
I don't think I have any insights into sort of plans. I share the envy of Giles around the sort of standard of trains that or buses, sorry, that they have in Holland. What I would say is, from our perspective, is you can, a folding bike like a Brompton is perfect for this exact scenario. And many of our customers do exactly this, whether it's using a train or a bus and combining this sort of multimodal approach. It often means they save money on car parking for driving to the train station, as well as on the sort of destination end as well. And sorry, there was a second question.
Well, I saw David Starley's put a comment on there, so it'd be quite good to get your take on the cycle to work. So you unless we've got two David Starleys in the room, then that could well be your comment there. So do you want to tell our audience about that then? You said it's quite simple to increase the loan to 5K and do a buyback option.
Yeah, I mean, I was just responding to one of the questions that someone had asked. So in terms of actually uplifting it to the 5,000 amount, and what we also did was we changed the payback to allow people to pay back over 24 months instead of just 12. And really, it was not that hard to do. And appreciate the comment earlier that the Cycle to Work scheme itself is quite complicated, but to do this was relatively simple. There is a slight increase in the liability financially that the company then takes on through that. But for a company as large as Babcock, it's pennies. So it wasn't difficult to get that through the right approvals, and the benefits to offering therefore e-bikes to employees far outweighed those issues or challenges. And
they were well received by employees at Babcock?
Actually, yes. And it was actually employees that asked for it in the first place. So this was one of the things which was requested through our employee feedback portal that we have. So it was a really nice example of being able to respond to that. But it's been interesting to hear a bit about the uptake for Dash with female cyclists. So I would be interested to know. I don't know if the majority of people taking up the Cycle to Work scheme now are male or female.
David Watkins.
Can I jump in? Yeah. So 2 points. The first one around increasing to 5K. David hit the nail on the head, which is, for a large company like Babcock, if 100 employees go and spend 5K on a bike, that's not a lot of money for a company as large as Babcock. But for a lot of smaller companies, that would be impossible, unaffordable from a company perspective. And so that's why I hear that all the time from companies who are hesitant to push Cycle to Work as an option, because they don't have the upfront capital to afford the upfront working capital to afford that. Secondly, yeah, it's as Olga mentioned, the sort of increasing accessibility with traditional Cycle to Work, it often favors people who know, I'm happy to commit for 24 months for a £5,000 e-bike because, I don't know, I've ridden one before or whatever. Giving someone the opportunity to try it for a month or two, that is what enables this sort of wider accessibility beyond the traditional sort of what I call sports cyclist or cyclist in inverted commas.
We haven't really touched on EV. We've touched on e-bikes, but actually in terms of electric vehicles, I'm curious to know where EV might play a role in this as well, in terms of particularly organisations who want to get their employees to switch over to EV and the various challenges that might be associated with that. Olga, have you got any input on that particularly?
I'm just thinking, I was about to say not really, but well, obviously, if you have the fleet of pool cars, make them electric, if you need to have that fleet of pool cars. But then think about, do you really need those pool cars? Can the car club solution be used instead? Because as I mentioned, there are lots of case studies when, for example, Siemens is one of the case studies I mentioned, when they moved pool cars to car club vehicles, and they actually got the savings, and you saving on, as they were electric and hybrid car club vehicles, which basically means you don't need to have as many pool cars, you're reducing the emissions, and obviously you're allowing your employees to travel on electric vehicles through car club scheme. So probably leave it here.
I'm being given a bit of a 1 minute warning, guys, so we're going to have to wrap it up. But can you, in 5 seconds each, just tell us what you think what we can expect to see in the future? So we'll shoot from the top. Ben, what can we expect to see in the future?
I think from Zelo's perspective, ultimately it's moved towards net zero. It's electric vehicles, but on a mass transit system. So getting people traveling together, but traveling on EV vehicles. But I think from listening to everyone else and the other panelists, it's not one single solution that's going to solve this, because everyone has different travel behaviours.
David Watkins.
Yeah, just more e-bikes as part of the mobility mix. I mean, we can see it happening. You know, even relative to EVs, the volume of e-bike sales is accelerating. So yeah, more e-bikes as part of the travel mix.
Fab. Olga, in as snappy as we can, what do you see in the future?
I think it'll be probably more user-focused approach, so tailored to the needs of each user, and with the vast majority of different options, it's what the user needs.
Great stuff. And David, Starley, finally.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything else, but I'd emphasize the collaborative as well. I think increasingly we're seeing more and more people open up to supporting each other on these and working together in their local regions to then get a much bigger impact as well.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, guys. Really appreciate it. That's all we got time for on this panel discussion. We're going to move over to one final case study video, and then we're going to have some closing words. So thanks, everyone, and goodbye.